Follow-up video based on having looked at people's responses so far to the question of the role of dreams in two of the texts that you've studied. And I want to particularly focus on how we might combine the two texts into one paragraph and develop those arguments. It's not a requirement, you can talk about them separately, but I do think that those people who are maybe struggling with the depth of analysis might be because you're separating out your ideas. And I wanted to go through an example here in relation to Persepolis and the Great Gatsby. Now, obviously, they might not be the two texts that you're looking at. Persepolis is a pretty common text, and you might apply that to a second text as well. But it really doesn't matter about the individual texts that you're looking at here. It's more about the logic behind it. So what's going to happen is I'm going to talk you through an example. I'm going to talk about how we might extend that, and then we're also going to have an opportunity at the end for you to apply this to your own text or to try and extend this a little bit more. Now, the reason why I think a lot of people are struggling with this is because they want to focus in on one or two characters, and they're not thinking about how that character or the scene that they're looking at has an impact on the other text that they're looking at, and how it has an impact on the wider understanding of the text as a whole. So how does it impact later events or earlier events? And when you're talking about context, people are talking about the American Dream or the Prohibition or Jazz era or the Iranian Revolution, but they're not really thinking about what or how that impacts the behavior, the language, the symbols, the tone and mood, or the authorial intention behind presenting these ideas. So that's my logic of trying to look at this, and hopefully it's helpful for you to kind of break down some ideas. So, like I said, I'm looking at Persepolis and Gatsby, but I'm introducing an idea early on here about the concept of dreams manifesting themselves physically. Like I say, Satrapi's desire to become a prophet and ensure that she could become justice, love, and the wrath of God all in one. As you know, you don't have to use quotes in your response, but I'm going to refer back to this. So I think it works for what I want to say here. But I'm also going to use this as a vehicle or a lens through which I'm going to look at Gatsby as well. So here, when I talk about the idea of prophecy or wanting to focus on justice, I'm saying that highlights the individualistic concerns that she feels towards a theocratic regime that she kind of feels oppressed and marginalized by. And really what I'm getting at here is that, as I said before, some people are talking about the Iranian Revolution, but they're not talking about how that limitation of language, of clothing, of like identity is really manifesting itself in her desire here to become a prophet. So the idea is that she wants to elevate herself, but maybe, like my point here, there's an unconscious desire to reform her identity, which correlates with that of Gatsby and Myrtle Wilson within Fitzgerald's canonical text. And I'm pointing out there that, hey, I know about these other characters, I understand how the text is perceived as part of the American literary canon. So I'm showing the examiner that I know where and how this is placed, but I'm also introducing this idea of, look at this overlap. They both want a better life for themselves, but here it's very much focusing on those people within that lower socio-economic class in The Great Gatsby, and how they, like it says here, ironically seek to elevate their status by connecting with those from a higher social class. They connect with Daisy or they connect with Tom, but they end up victims of the same justice or injustice alluded to Marjan, where systemic oppression ensures that most inhabitants of the Valley of Ashes are confined to an inferior form of prophecy in the fading eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. There's no reference in Gatsby to talking about prophecies really, or being a prophet, but the idea here is that I'm looking for that correlation of like that symbolic imagery or kind of religious connotations of people in the Valley of Ashes, or in James Gatz's position, wanting to elevate themselves and trying to do so, but the system stops them from doing so. And kind of that's something I'll explore more in a moment. But like I've said here, they both become victims of the churlish arrogance of the residents of the East Egg, whose indifference condemns them to their fate. So really reinforcing the idea that they are victims, but also that there's kind of like an apathy towards this. The idea that Satrapi was talking about justice here, like I'm coming back to that, Marjane suffers this indignance of being confronted with the unrealistic nature of her own dream when they say, what, you want to be a prophet? And she's like self-aware enough, and she has that elevated social status, so she conforms to societal pressures by reverting to what is socially accepted in saying she wants to be a doctor. And so there's this kind of like cyclical nature of this. Hey, we're looking at how and why these dreams and desires to improve themselves manifest themselves, but I'm also looking at how there's an overlap. Hey, look, Satrapi herself is writing about this, so therefore is kind of now, or writing with that benefit of hindsight, to understand that, like, hey, there was reasons for that, but we can see her thinking behind it. And that's something that I think is worth coming back to, or maybe extending this idea with. Like, her internal dialogue impacts the way that we see her idea of dreams, or the idea of dreams as a whole. As well as that, I think you might also want to take this and look at how George Wilson refers to the eyes of Eckelberg as the eyes of God. He says that God sees everything, and what this suggests about the kind of materialistic, capitalistic notion of success, and what it means to be really focusing on that idea of like identity, but through the idea that you can elevate yourself. And then also maybe thinking about how we see a lot of this through the lens of Caraway, and how that influences our perception of Myrtle and Jay. And I think that's really what I'm getting at here, is that there's a range of factors, including, like here, how we might have religion reinforcing dreams, or externally imposing ideas about what dreams could be, and whether that's like a deity or like a pseudo-deity in the sense of Eckelberg. I think really drilling into, like, what does this really tell us about the characters and how they perceive identity, the transformative nature of dreams, and kind of the limitations of those. And really what I'm trying to do here is introduce an idea at the start of the paragraph. I then develop it throughout the paragraph, and then I kind of look for where can I connect this, and where can I see that this is similar or different. So really what I'm asking you to do here is to try and apply this to your own thinking, to think of, within either the same text or different texts, think of key scenes, characters, or events that are not just generally talking about the main character. It's interesting. Now, it can be the main character. Obviously, I talked there about Satrapi, but really interesting, I think, to talk about, like, how we see the ripple effect of this with either the peripheral characters or different characters, and how they perceive the events happening from the perspective of the main characters. And then once you've done that, I want you to think about, like, how is this shown in a similar or different way to the second text, or in the second text. So, like, whatever it is that you're seeing, whether it's that a certain character or scene or event is kind of telling you something about attitudes, beliefs, opinions, whatever it is that you want to kind of pull out from that, I want you to just look at how is it shown in the second text, and then try writing a practice paragraph of your own. Same question, still this: what's the role of dreams? And just thinking about really how can you combine the two together and have this overlap. So you're not just looking at, like, one text and then the second text. You're really trying to think about the ideas that are mentioned about this character. Could we apply this, or how does that differ when we compare it between the two texts? And I hope you can see that I've not delineated this in a very strict way. There's not that, like, rigidity of saying you have to stop talking about that character and move on to this character, or you have to very clearly say this is different. Like, you can jump around and say, despite that, it's shown in this way within the first or the second text. So play around with this, have a go, and see what you can come up with. And I'm hoping that in doing so, you're able to kind of balance your text and have a little bit more depth in your explorations. As always, thank you for listening to this, and I hope that this was helpful.